Traditional communities like those of the Uros people of the floating islands on Lake Titicaca are easily impacted by tourism, whether positively or negatively. By having large amounts of visitors interested in their culture, Uros people are motivated and encouraged to keep up the traditional practices and customs so they have something to share with the world. Cultural art, like handmade textiles, is promoted to tourists to help pique more interest, preserve cultural art, and earn a profit. This helps prevent their culture and traditions from diminishing. However, there are always negatives in every situation, including the impacts of tourism on local Uros people. The increased curiosity of the floating islands has caused overfishing in the waters of the Uros, sewage pollution that causes environmental and health problems, and changes to traditional culture. Commercial fishermen overfish in the Uros waters, depleting the locals of the main part of their diet. To compensate, the waters are instead filled with North American trout, which ended up being classified as an invasive species. Additionally, the totora reeds that are the foundation of the islands and a major part of the Uros people's diet grow shorter as a cause of sewage and or pesticides that seep into the lake. And because of increased tourism, the indigenous people have to spend large amounts of time guiding, accommodating, and entertaining tourists, and end up with less time to maintain the islands and live a traditional lifestyle. From an economic perspective, the indigenous people don't actually gain much from tourism. The indigenous communities on Lake Titicaca don't receive any profit from the boat tours. Rather, they rely on selling textiles to make ends meet. Instead of sharing their culture, customs, and handicrafts for the sole purpose of sharing, Earl's people have to push the sales of their textiles to ensure survival. Although the negative impacts of tourism heavily outweigh the positives, the local Earl's people are still very welcoming and happy to have visitors on their island where they can share their traditional lifestyle. So even when there are many negative impacts of tourism, I believe that tourism on the floating islands is ethical since it should depend on how the indigenous people perceive tourism on their islands. However, I do think that tourism on these floating islands needs to change to prevent further damage to their culture and the surrounding environment. I think a very important change would be to control tourism in the area. The local indigenous community should be allowed to have certain time slots to live a traditional lifestyle without any foreign interruptions. I also think that that tours to the islands should have entrance fees to help the indigenous people make ends meet and control the visitor flow.